Everyone ignored the collapsing biker. One nurse helped. The next day, a biker gang came for her. People say America's heart is broken, too busy, too afraid, too distracted to care. At least that's how it felt when the old man hit the pavement outside of Gracie's diner and nobody moved. A dozen eyes watched as he slumped off his Harley and collapsed, clutching his chest, gasping for breath. Phones stayed in pockets. Coffee sipped. Heads turned away. It was easier to assume he was drunk, high, or just another dusty biker who'd pushed his luck. But Samantha Blake, a 32-year-old ER nurse on her first real day off in weeks, didn't hesitate. She shoved her to-go bag into someone's hands, dropped to her knees, and started chest compressions right there in the parking lot, in front of a diner full of people too comfortable to care. "Call 911, she yelled. Nothing. One man glanced out from behind the windshield of his SUV, then looked away. A couple kept eating inside. A waitress at the door watched with arms crossed. For a second, it looked like Samantha might be the only human being in a town of mannequins. The old biker wasn't breathing. His skin was pale, his lips already turning blue. Samantha checked his pulse, faint and fading. Without missing a beat, she began compressions. Hard, deep, relentless. 30 compressions, she muttered to herself, sweat already gathering on her brow. 2 breaths. Again. She tilted his head, gave 2 slow, full breaths, and repeated the cycle. Still no one moved to help. One teenager finally took out his phone, but not to call 911. He hit record. Samantha caught him in the corner of her eye. "Put the phone down and help me." He blinked, startled, then hit record again. Samantha kept going. She didn't care if he was a criminal, a drunk, a gang member, or someone who'd made 100 bad choices. He was dying, and no one was coming to save him. Except her. The minutes dragged. Her arms burned. Gravel dug into her knees. She didn't stop. Then finally, the sound of sirens in the distance. She didn't look up. She kept pumping. Press, press, press. The EMTs arrived fast. 2 men jumped out, grabbed their gear, and ran to take over. Samantha backed off, chest heaving, eyes still locked on the man. He collapsed. No verbal response. CPR ongoing for 6 minutes. "I couldn't get anyone to help," she said, voice tight. One of the medics looked her dead in the eyes and nodded. "You probably saved his life." They loaded him onto a stretcher. The ambulance doors slammed shut. And just like that, he was gone. The parking lot went quiet again. Cars passed. Birds chirped. A fry cook lit a cigarette near the dumpster and said nothing. Samantha sat on the curb, catching her breath. Her hands were shaking. She looked around at the people who had watched, done nothing, then moved on. That was the part that hit hardest. Not the effort. Not the risk. Not even the possibility that he might still die in the back of that ambulance. It was the apathy. People had watched a man fall and decided he wasn't worth the trouble. She stood up slowly, brushed the gravel from her palms, and retrieved her paper bag of food from the ground. The sandwich inside had been crushed flat. She threw it into the nearest trash can and walked to her car. Back at home, she didn't cry. She didn't even tell anyone. She just sat on her couch in silence, staring at nothing, playing the scene over in her mind. Why had no one else moved? She thought of her hospital shifts, the overdose cases brought in from alleys, the domestic calls, the ones people liked to write off. Just another addict. Just another loser. That was how it always started. One less moment of empathy, one more shrug. But it still stunned her to see it unfold in daylight, in public, in front of a man who might have had kids, a past, a name. Someone's brother. Someone's father. She didn't even know his name. She'd seen the patch on his vest. A worn emblem, darkened from age and dust. It meant something, but she couldn't read it fast enough. Too focused on the rise and fall of his chest, or lack thereof. Now she wondered who he was. What kind of life he'd lived. What roads had led him here. Would anyone even come looking for him? She didn't know then that this man, this gray-bearded biker no one wanted to help, was far more than he seemed. She didn't know that saving him would change everything. She didn't know that he wasn't alone, and that the next time she'd see his face, it wouldn't be in an ambulance, but on the back of a Harley, surrounded by roaring engines, with 6 more riders flanking him. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, all she knew was that one man had fallen, that everyone else had looked away, and that she didn't. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that was starting to feel more dangerous than she expected. Samantha Blake didn't expect to be judged. Not for doing CPR. Not for stepping in. But as she walked into the same diner the next morning for coffee, same sneakers, same ponytail, the silence hit like a slap. Every head turned. Every eye followed her. People she didn't know, didn't even recognize, now watched her like she was some kind of walking controversy. The waitress who'd ignored the biker's fall stood frozen behind the counter. A man in a golf polo sat by the window, arms crossed, muttering to the guy next to him. She just made a scene. Could have waited for paramedics. She didn't even know if he was high. She touched a stranger. In public. Samantha heard it all, loud and clear. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't admiration. It was judgment. She kept her eyes down, ordered a black coffee, and walked back outside, breath held tight in her chest. The man she'd saved, if he even made it, had vanished into an ambulance. And all she had left was the weight of their stares. No, thank you. No, well done. Just quiet condemnation. Later that day, her name started to float online. Someone had posted the footage, the teenager's phone video. The grainy clip of her on her knees, compressing the chest of an unresponsive biker in a diner parking lot. A few words over it in bold white text. Nurse plays hero after biker collapses outside Gracie's. The comments section turned fast. Looks staged. Probably trying to go viral. Why would she touch a dirty biker? Should have let the cops handle it. Some defended her. Most didn't. In a world of 10-second attention spans, the truth didn't matter, only the performance. By nightfall, Samantha's phone was blowing up. A local news station reached out for an interview. She declined. A reporter knocked on her door. She didn't answer. She hadn't done it to be noticed. She did it because a man was dying. And because no one else gave a damn. But the whispers kept growing. She should have minded her business. She embarrassed the town. She made everyone look bad. It wasn't just strangers now, it was neighbors. Parents at the grocery store. People at her gym. A few subtle looks. A few quiet exits. Her world was getting smaller and darker, one glare at a time. 3 days later, Samantha walked into the hospital for her next shift and found a note taped to her locker. No name. Just block handwriting. He's a gang member. You picked the wrong guy to save. She stood frozen. For the first time since it happened, her hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from fear. Who had written it? A coworker? A patient's family? Someone from town? And what did they mean by wrong guy? Samantha had no answers. She finished her shift anyway. 12 hours. 3 trauma cases. 1 overdose. 1 woman who coded twice and somehow lived. By the time she walked back to her car at 3 a.m., the parking lot was cold, empty, silent. Except, it wasn't. Samantha stopped. Across from her car, in the shadows, sat a man on a motorcycle. Not the same one. Newer. Bigger. Clean. Blacked out chrome. He didn't move. Just watched. Samantha's heart pounded. Her key slipped in her hand. The adrenaline hit fast, faster than it had in the parking lot. Was this it? Was the note a warning? She stepped forward, ready to confront him. But then he turned the handlebars, slowly, and rode off into the night. No words. No threat. Gone. She didn't know it yet, but that man wasn't there to hurt her. He was there to watch over her. And he wasn't alone. By dawn, a message would appear on the hospital's Facebook page. Anonymous. Just a single line. To the nurse who didn't look away, thank you. You didn't just save a man. You woke up a family. It would take another 24 hours before she found out what that meant. Before the engines roared outside her home. Before a line of Harleys parked outside the diner, not for food, but for her. And before the man she saved walked through the door, not as a dying stranger, but as someone with power, history, and a whole gang behind him. But right now, Samantha was alone with the weight of a town that didn't want to look in the mirror. They hadn't moved when a man fell. And now that someone had, they hated her for it. 2 days passed. No updates. No thank you. No closure. Samantha tried to forget, but the image haunted her, the moment his knees hit pavement, the stillness, the weight of a heart that may or may not have made it. Then came Sunday morning. She was back at Gracie's diner, not to be brave, not to make a point. Just for coffee. Just to feel normal. She was sipping it by the hood of her car when the rumble hit. Low at first, like thunder behind the hills. Then closer. Louder. Sharp. Engines. Multiple. A dozen or more. Heads turned inside the diner. The same people who'd watched a man collapse in silence now pressed against the glass, eyes wide. And then they rolled in. Bikes. Big ones. Loud. Clean. chrome flashing. One by one they turned into the lot. No rush. No chaos. A procession. Controlled. Measured. Like a funeral or a military escort. Samantha stood still. There were 6 riders, dressed in heavy leathers, black bandanas, patches with unfamiliar crests. None smiled. None spoke. Then, the 7th bike pulled in. Black Harley. Custom pipes. American flag stitched onto the side. Riding it was the man she saved. Alive. Upright. And looking straight at her. His beard had been trimmed. His jacket was cleaner, newer, but his face was unmistakable. Deep-lined, hardened by life, eyes sharp with purpose. He parked, took off his helmet, and handed it to a nearby rider like it was second nature. Then he walked to her. Not fast. Not hesitant. Deliberate. Samantha's heart raced. "Miss Blake," he said, voice rough but clear. She nodded. He offered a hand. "Name's Walt Brennan. You pulled me back from the grave." Her voice caught. "You made it." "Barely," he said, smiling. "But breathing." He paused, then glanced toward the others. "They came with me. Figured we owed you more than a Facebook comment." Samantha glanced at the bikes. The men weren't posturing. They weren't posing. They were standing guard. "Who are you?" she asked. Walt smirked. "You mean besides the guy you kept alive while the rest of this town pretended I didn't exist?" She didn't answer. He leaned slightly closer. "Used to run a company out west. Military contracts. Retired young. Got bored. Rode cross-country. That night outside the diner? First time I'd been back to this state in 20 years. She blinked. "You're a CEO?" "Was," he nodded. "Before that, U.S. Army. 2 tours. Got the limp to prove it." It didn't match. Nothing matched. His jacket said biker. His face said trouble. But the way he stood, the weight behind his words, it was different. "What were you doing here?" she asked. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Looking for someone. A daughter I haven't seen in 15 years. Silence. The twist hit her hard, but not as hard as what came next. "I thought she might be working in this town. Nurse, maybe. Your name's not the one I was chasing, but fate's funny like that." Samantha opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand gently. "You don't owe me a word, but I owe you everything. If you hadn't acted, if you'd been like them, my story would have ended face down in a diner lot." He stepped aside. One of the other riders approached. Tall, young, tattooed, but respectful. "We just wanted you to know," he said. "You didn't save a nobody. You saved one of ours." Samantha looked from one face to the next. Something was happening here. Something bigger than a thank you or a reunion. This wasn't a gang. It was a brotherhood. A network. A hidden family of ex-military, former executives, and road-worn men who still carried something sacred in their bones. Code. Honor. Loyalty. And they had shown up for her. "You came back just to tell me that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Walt shook his head. "No," he said. "We came back to protect you." "Protect me?" He gestured toward the diner windows. The same faces. The same silence. But now, laced with fear. "You embarrass the comfortable," he said. "And that makes you dangerous to them." She looked down at her hands. The same ones that pressed into his chest, that kept his heart pumping. "You don't have to be afraid," he added. "You're one of us now." And in that moment, Samantha realized something she hadn't expected. She hadn't just saved a man's life. She'd awakened something in people the town had tried to forget. And they weren't going anywhere. The next morning, the sun rose gray and heavy, casting long shadows across Gracie's diner parking lot. The same place where everything had started. Samantha sat inside, nursing her coffee, the quiet hum of the early rush filling the air. But outside, the tension was electric, like the calm before a storm. She knew why. The 6 bikers were parked outside in formation, engines off but still rumbling with silent power. Their presence was impossible to ignore. Gracie's staff whispered behind the counter. The regulars peeked out nervously. Nobody dared approach. Until the door creaked open. Mayor Tom Benson stepped inside. The man who had watched the collapse the day Samantha saved Walt, watched and said nothing. He scanned the room, his gaze settling on the bikers visible through the window. Then he looked at Samantha. "Ms. Blake," he said, his voice smooth but sharp. "Care to explain what this circus is about?" Samantha stood, steadied herself. "They came for a reason. To thank me, and to stand by me." Benson's lips twitched. "They're trouble. This town doesn't need a biker gang showing up to stir the pot." "They're not a gang," Samantha said firmly. "They're veterans, former leaders, men with a code. They came because I saved one of their own. The mayor's eyes narrowed. A man who could be a liability. We can't have that kind of attention. Maybe the attention is what we need, Samantha replied, voice rising. Maybe the real problem is how many people stood by and did nothing when he fell. A heavy silence settled. Then, without warning, the door opened wider, and Walt stepped inside. He moved calmly, but his presence shifted the air. Mayor Benson, he said evenly, you speak of liability, but I'm a man who built companies, fought wars, and lived by honor. I don't come to threaten this town. I come to remind it. Remind it of what? Benson challenged, stepping closer, jaw clenched. Remind it that people still have a choice. To look away or to stand up. Gracie's diner was packed now. Some whispered. Some stared. Others avoided eye contact. The bikers remained silent sentinels near the windows, watching. Mayor Benson's face darkened. You brought your crew here to intimidate. Walt's eyes flashed. We brought respect. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. A man from the back booth stood. Joe, a longtime local who had watched the collapse with the same indifference as most. Why should we care about some biker's life? Joe barked. He's one of those troublemakers. Always has been. And now you want us to thank you for playing hero. Samantha stepped forward. Because every life matters. Because apathy kills. Joe scoffed. You don't know anything about him. About what he's done. Walt's eyes locked on Joe's. I'm that man, Joe. I'm the one who nearly died. And the one she saved. Gasps echoed. You. Joe shook his head, disbelief turning to anger. You're just a ghost story we tell ourselves. Not real. I'm real, Walt said quietly. And I'm here to change the story. He turned to the crowd. For too long, this town has looked away. Pretended the broken don't matter. But that silence? It's a wound. Mayor Benson's face twisted. This isn't about wounds. It's about control. And you all are shaking things up. Samantha's voice cut through the room. What's really shaking things up is the truth. The truth that people like Walt aren't the problem, our silences. An older woman near the counter wiped tears. I saw it, she said softly. I saw him fall. And I was scared. I didn't move. The room shifted. The judgment began to crack. Me too, another voice confessed. I thought he was dangerous, whispered a young mother. The mayor's grip on power was loosening. Walt nodded at Samantha. You gave me life. Now, together, we'll give this town a chance to heal. The bikers moved forward, not to threaten, but to stand with those who had been ignored. Samantha looked out the window at the faces of a town forced to confront its own apathy and fear. The silence was broken, and something new was born in its place. The diner's atmosphere was thick with tension, but beneath it simmered something deeper, a secret waiting to be uncovered. After the confrontation, Walt invited Samantha and a few trusted bikers to a quiet spot just outside town, a weathered barn on the edge of a sprawling field. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows, but the air was heavy with unspoken truths. Samantha's curiosity was a knot tightening in her chest. She needed answers. Walt locked the barn door behind them and pulled out an old, worn leather binder. This, he said, flipping it open, is why I came back. Inside were photographs, faded documents, and letters. But one photo caught Samantha's eye. A young woman, strikingly familiar, standing next to Walt with a soft smile. My daughter, Walt said quietly. Her name is Emily. We lost touch years ago. Samantha's breath caught. Is this why you were here? To find her. Walt nodded. I tracked her here months ago. I heard she might be working at the hospital, maybe even under your name. I was wrong, but fate led me to you instead. Why? Samantha asked, feeling the weight of the moment. Because, Walt said, voice low, I wasn't just looking for Emily. I was trying to make amends. He told a story few expected. A decade ago, Walt's company was involved in a secretive government contract, something tied to medical research and battlefield triage technologies. But it ended in scandal. Lives were lost. Truths buried. Emily, his daughter, had become a whistleblower. She exposed the cover-up. Her life turned upside down. And Walt? He disappeared, haunted by guilt and regret. I was running from my past, he admitted. Trying to outrun mistakes that cost too much. Samantha looked at him, stunned. And the biker gang. They're not just bikers, Walt explained. They're former soldiers, scientists, engineers, people connected to that project. They've been protecting Emily ever since. So this is bigger than me. Bigger than the diner. Walt nodded gravely. You saved me. Now you're part of something you don't fully understand yet. Samantha's mind raced. Why tell me this now? Because the people who want that secret buried, they're watching, and they don't want you or Emily to find each other. A sudden noise made them freeze, the distant growl of engines. Walt's eyes sharpened. They found us. The barn door rattled. The bikers moved, blocking the entrance. Samantha's heart pounded. The peaceful evening shattered. Walt turned to her. Stay close. We're about to fight for more than just a life. We're fighting for truth. The secret was out, and the battle was only beginning. The distant roar of engines grew louder, a storm rolling in on two wheels, cutting through the quiet countryside like a thunderclap. Shadows danced against the barn's weathered walls as Walt and his riders braced for what was coming. Samantha stood between them, heart pounding, the weight of the secret settling heavy in her chest. Outside, headlights flickered through the trees, casting harsh, probing beams into the darkness. They're coming for us, Walt said, voice calm but steel hard. The group moved quickly, blocking the barn's entrances with muscle and makeshift weapons, chains, bats, anything they could grab. The bikers' faces, usually stoic, showed a rare flicker of tension. Minutes later, the first figures appeared, black SUVs rolling through the gravel, their occupants obscured beneath dark, tinted windows. Men in suits, faces unreadable but intent unmistakable. Samantha felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. This wasn't a small-town grudge. This was something bigger. Something dangerous. Walt's grip tightened on his jacket. They don't want the truth to come out. Who are they? Samantha asked, voice low. Corporate ghosts. Government shadows. People who hide behind power and money. The barn's wooden door creaked open, and one of the bikers stepped forward, barking a warning. But the SUVs kept advancing, and out poured a group of black-clad men, security contractors, trained and ready. The air thickened. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Chains swung. Tires screeched. The two sides collided in a blur of fist and fury. Samantha ducked behind a stack of crates, watching as Walt fought with a fierce determination, every move precise, every strike purposeful. The bikers were more than just riders. They were soldiers still, warriors who fought for what was right. But this was more than a fight for survival. It was a stand for justice. Samantha's pulse quickened as one of the black-clad men pulled a weapon, aiming at Walt. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. The gun skittered across the dirt. Her training took over. She fought tooth and nail, adrenaline surging through her veins. Around her, the battle raged. The barn filled with shouts, crashes, and the metallic clash of wills. Minutes felt like hours. Then, a sudden blast, a flashbang thrown into the fray, sent everyone reeling. Samantha hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision blurred. When she looked up, the bikers had formed a tight circle around Walt and her, shielding them from the assault. Walt caught her gaze, nodding once, a silent promise. They wouldn't back down. The black-clad men hesitated, regrouped, then slowly retreated to their vehicles, leaving behind the wreckage of broken crates and burning rubber. Silence settled again. Samantha wiped dirt and sweat from her brow, chest heaving. Walt approached, steady and unscathed. You were incredible, he said, respect deep in his voice. I just didn't want him to die, she replied, voice shaking but resolute. Walt smiled faintly. You saved more than me. You saved a family, a mission, a truth. Samantha looked around at the faces of the riders, men who had come to trust her, to rely on her courage. They weren't just a gang of bikers anymore. They were a force ready to fight for what mattered. And now, so was she. The night had tested them, but it had also forged something stronger. A bond, a purpose, and a promise that no secret would stay buried, not while they still breathed. The dawn broke cold and sharp, but in the air was a charged energy, the kind that crackles before a storm finally breaks free. Samantha stood outside Gracie's diner, the place where the whole story began. The once quiet town now buzzed with whispers of the biker gang mystery and the heroic nurse who refused to look away. She had been through more than she ever imagined. Saving a dying biker, facing down shadows from the past, and standing shoulder to shoulder with a brotherhood forged by loyalty and loss. Now, it was time for the reckoning. Walt Brennan approached, his eyes steady, a silent understanding passing between them. We've gathered what we need, he said. The evidence that proves the cover-up, the truth that was buried by greed and fear. Samantha nodded, gripping the thick folder Walt handed her. Photos, documents, testimonies, everything the corporate ghosts hoped would stay hidden. But it wouldn't. The bikers had rallied the town's forgotten voices, the veterans, the nurses, the everyday heroes tired of silence. They stood ready to expose the lies. Together, they headed to the town hall, where Mayor Benson waited, his smug confidence now tempered by unease. Inside, the room was tense. Reporters from nearby cities had arrived, drawn by the unfolding drama. The story of a simple woman nurse who saved a biker's life, only to uncover a scandal that shook a community. Samantha stepped forward, heart-pounding but voice clear. "This isn't just about one man's collapse outside a diner," she said. "It's about accountability, courage, and the power of standing up when others turn away." Walt laid out the evidence: contracts falsified, medical experiments hidden, lives endangered. The room gasped. Mayor Benson stammered, caught off guard. His attempts to dismiss the claims only deepened suspicion. Outside, the bikers stood guard, a visible reminder that this was no longer just a small-town secret. The crowd grew restless, voices rising with calls for justice. Then, a voice from the back, a former employee of the scandalized project, stepped forward with a confession. The truth poured out like a flood, cleansing years of silence and fear. Samantha watched, tears prickling as the town finally faced its demons. It was a reckoning for the past and for the future. Later, as the sun dipped low, Walt and Samantha returned to the diner's parking lot. The bikers gathered around, laughter and relief breaking through the tension. "You changed everything," Walt said softly. Samantha smiled, exhausted but alive. "We did it together." The biker gang mystery had unraveled, but more importantly, a simple woman nurse had reminded a town what it meant to care. Her single act of courage had sparked a revolution, a story that would be told for years, about a nurse who saved a biker, and in doing so, saved an entire community.